Thank you for checking out In the Now Eventually Press, a home for independent writers. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. You can also follow the link in the description to our Patreon page and become a patron for access to special bonuses. Thank you, and please enjoy the story.
The Cambell Family Shotgun by Jordie Mack. Part 1. Muerte, he said, and that's for sure. William Philodorus hitched up his buckskin trousers and preemptively chopped him clean of the powdery dirt. He lowered himself, leaning one hand on his bony knee and taking the other on the chin of the corpse. He spotted it off this desolate road, known as Scorpion's Trail, and expected a rotten old thing. Still, the cadaver was fresh. Summer heat and Mojave vultures had yet to have their way with the poor devil, but soon they would. No Christian burial, and presumably an unjust execution. That wasn't even the worst of it. William sighed. He pinched the dead man's chin and turned his head over, looking at him the way a mother might look over their child for dirt spots, and examined the 2 points of entry on the cadaver's neck. "By Harry," he exclaimed. Double bullet punctures just below the jawline, small ones, reliably from a .22 caliber, and how they sat so close together on his jugular reminded Will of that vampire book from England he'd read last winter. "By Harry," he repeated and shook his head. It was not a nice way to go, getting shot in the throat with such a pokey slug. He likely choked on his own blood and took his time, catching air now and then, which would have been worse, since it gave him hope. Whoever done it to him was a sick bastard. All the same, William thought the dead man looked really peaceful. His eyes shut, and his face was without fear, looking like he'd fallen asleep rather than fallen dead. It made William feel better about looting his body. He opened the dead man's mouth, inspected the teeth for gold fillings, and ran his hand inside each pocket. 1 on his shirt, 4 in his pants, and a leather satchel tied around his belt. Whoever did this fella emptied him of all his coin and notary, pointing to the murder motive. As a professional vulture, William figured the predators may still have missed something. He untied the man's shoes and shook them over his hand, but only found lint and dirt. Then dug around in the man's socks to no avail. Then took off all the man's clothes and searched them over, but the corpse had been properly fleeced. He kicked dirt, sighed, and placed the man's shirt and pants back over his naked body. He turned back towards the road from which he had spotted the corpse, when something caught the corner of his eye and swung around. A thistle bush, maybe 10 meters towards the setting sun. Something stuck out from its right side and appeared unnatural to William. He strode over and kicked the bush, shaking from it a shotgun. Finally, a prize to take home. Upon inspection, he found it a 12-gauge, finely crafted, equipped with a varnished red oak comb and forearm for fine weight distribution. The show-stealer was the engraving. Along its grip, side, top chamber, and even the trigger ring was a metal Bellino-style engraving. It was beautiful and featured blue jays in flight surrounded by inlays of leaves and swirling intricate patterns like snowflakes spun around lollipops. William whistled as he held the gun up to the light and inspected all its intricacies, but made a stupefied sound once he ran his thumb along it. The engraving did not feel like the fine steel it appeared to be, but was soft and tinny. He worried if he pressed hard enough it would dent the metal, which was certainly not the sign of a high-quality material. Still, the craftsman, or craftswoman as he would learn, was one fine artist, especially considering the cheap material they worked with. William took the shotgun back to the body, showed it to him one last time, and tipped his hat in thanks before returning to the road where the obedient horse Winnie waited. He opened the flap of the horse's side satchel, dropped the shotgun in, and tied it tight. The next stop was still 2 days out, and losing such a prize would be a shame. Part 2. Crows, Arizona. An ambitious settlement, considering the lonely 100 who called it home, established no more than 20 years ago. Already they had an inn, a saloon, a store for sups and ammunition, and soon they'd have a bank. At least, that was the plan. William saw no bank, but a building with a sign posted out front reading, "Bank to Be," bringing a chuckle. He'd heard of Crows in a settlement called Two Guns, where he'd stayed a week punching leather, making back the funds he'd lost in a card game. He'd come north from Utah, and his destination was west in the mountains of California, where gold was said to grow from grass. Perhaps it did, and perhaps it didn't. Or maybe it had been picked clean by the time he'd arrived, but it mattered not to William. You always go where the wealth is, that was his motto, whether or not that wealth was guaranteed. His goal was gold, and he'd only know 2 ways of getting it, picking it or rolling that die. Night had fallen, and so had rain. William was worn down from his travels, and now that he was soaking wet, it only made him more ornery. It had been 3 days since he left Two Guns, and 2 days since he'd found the body. He tied Winnie to the first covered post, rubbed the old girl's face, and told her sorry for putting her away wet. He crawled off her back, stretched his legs with a moan, and cursed softly at his feet on his way down the road. In the town center, he noticed a well and peered down inside. It looked like it had been years since anyone had used it, probably all dried up. He rolled up a wad of phlegm, fatter than the raindrops, and spat it down the well to listen for the sound. There wasn't any. For a moment, his stomach felt all fluttery as he imagined falling in that waterfall, and no one even telling he was down there. He backed away carefully and headed for the inn. "Well, you're nice and tall, ain't you?" the woman behind the bar said to Willie as she wiped down the counter. "But, I've seen taller. Maybe not skinnier." "Can't stay the same for you, ma'am," he replied with a wink. "You're lucky old Marjorie needs business," she said, pronouncing Marjorie in a sing-songy manner. "And I can bet you're this Marjorie," William said, mimicking her pattern of speech. "That you can. If you're staying here, I'll need your name as well, so how about it?" "Name's Philodorus. William Philodorus. Come down from Utah and heading out west for the sifting. Wish me luck?" "Only if you plan on coming back and spending the loot here," she said, and thrust her considerable bosom. "Your room number 4. There ain't no key, so when you're done with the chair, prop it up against the door. Don't reckon you'll have any trouble, though. Crows ain't never had any trouble with break-ins. No trouble with anything, to be certain." "Is that so?" William propped his elbow on the counter and wiped his nose. "That means you're looking for someone to come play sheriff?" "Ha! We got ourselves a sheriff, skinny man. He's a mean son of a gun, too. I like him, though. Knows how to treat a lady right, and a fine dresser to boot." "That case, I'll pay for my room and be about myself. I'll stay for a drink all the same. All this talk got me thirsty." "Whatever you say." Marjorie rolled her eyes, and William could tell she liked him. She popped the cork off a brown bottle, poured out 2 glasses, and handed them back. "For your trouble," she said. "And for yours," William replied, handing her a $2 bill, which she stuffed into the front of her bra and returned to her cleaning. William took his drinks to the table at the far end, where he could take in all there was to see. A piano sat beside him without anyone to play it, and by the looks of the dust collecting on the keys, it had been some time since they'd had a tune played in the joint. They're better off selling the thing, he thought. Help get that bank off the ground. His eyes took to the table next to his, where 4 gentlemen leaned over their drinks in a game of gin rummy, each with a cigarette hanging from their mouths, and the ash so close to their lips it threatened to set their mustache ablaze. William licked his lips, wishing he could get in the game. The sound of girlish laughter drew him away from the table 2 across, from where a lady and her date traded shots for fun, getting mighty drunk by the looks of it. He watched the laughing woman, amused by her cheer and beauty, but looked away when he caught himself being rude. 2 dudes leaned over the counter near the window, watching the storm, until they started staring at William like he was even worse. Rough-looking guys, one muscular and squinted-eye, the other untrimmed, tall, and large. That one reminded William of the giant in the beanstalk. Rather than looking away in politeness, he returned their gaze as long as they kept theirs. His eyes moved up and down their bodies, eventually landing on the giant's gun holster. When he noticed what kind of gun the giant was carrying, it showed on his face. The 2 men turned their whole bodies towards William.
"Something wrong, mister?"
the giant said in a low, bellowy voice.
"Yeah," his friend emphasized. "Looks like something had you blinking."
"Ain't no blinking, friend. I'm drinking bristled whiskey. It can be better off drinking sand."
"You saying our drinks don't taste good?"
the tall one said, taller than even William himself, but not skinnier. "Aw, hell," William thought, hiding his irritation with an affable grin. "Well, my friend, if you really must know, I was looking at that pistol on your holster."
"This'n?"
The giant pulled and pointed it towards the ceiling.
"It's a mighty fine instrument, ivory grip."
"I seen that, though it's a 22, ain't it?"
"Certainly."
The big man reholstered the pistol and patted the thing with affection. "Dang my melt. It must be true then. This here's a safe town."
"Why you say that?"
"Can't expect to win a fight with a 22, less it's with a varmint, or someone that ain't expecting to be shot."
"It's for killing varmints."
"None too quickly, though."
"Quick enough."
William nodded and pouted as if to say, "Well, how about that?" He tipped his drink and turned away politely. The 2 men looked at each other, and the tall one gestured towards William with his neck, so the big one stepped forth.
"Hey there, son. Where'd you say you're from?"
"Calamity! Calamity!" a squawking, flailing man interrupted, busted in through the bat wings, and shouted like the devil was at his back. "Calamity and hellfire! Darkest of days! Darkest of days!" "Johnny boy," Marjorie snapped, "would you shut your gums, or give us cause for your hollering?" "Righty will, ma'am," Johnny said, still breathing fast, but taking off his hat and holding it over his chest solemnly. "Righty will. 'Tis just so dang horrible. I don't know if I can rightly find the words for it. Our boy Sonny well, he's—"
"Dead,"
another voice finished. The man trailed in behind Sonny, walking on thick, jangling spurs louder than the thunder and rain, and pushed apart the bat wings like he was mad at him.
"Dead as can be,"
he said again. The inn gasped and went to muttering. "Sheriff Donaghy," the laughing woman William had spied on, stood up from her table. "How do you know he's dead? Maybe there's been some kind of mistake."
"Sweet Shannon, I'm afraid there's no mistake. I saw the body myself."
More gasps came out.
"Out on the Scorpion trails 'tween here and 2 Guns. I'd have missed it if it weren't for Johnny boy. Spotted it and yelped out. We looked him over, and sure as shooting, it was our Sonny. All in all, he looked all right. He looked like himself. The buzzards and coyotes hadn't got him yet. They're coming."
The mood grew more morose and quiet until the tall man and giant pistoned up from their seats and came to stand beside the sheriff.
"We'll get that scoundrel who's done this, boss,"
the bigger one said, pulling out his 22 again and cocking the hammer.
"Yeah, we'll get him,"
added the tall one.
"It won't be so easy, Lou," the sheriff said to the giant. "Johnny Boy and I already searched the land where Sonny lay for clues. Maybe we'll do better with a search team, but that's a prayer's chance. A coroner can only tell us what we already know. The man's with Jesus, and that's it." "Cripes, whoever did this really picked his spots, smart scoundrel." Lou, the giant, snapped his fingers in frustration. "What about his famous shotgun? Did they leave that at least? Sonny sure loved that." "They fleeced him from head to toe. There was nothing, even left him naked, with only his clothes laid on top." "Yeah, they smart. We won't wait for the judge to ride in when we catch this guy. You understand me?" The sheriff kicked the floor, leaving a mark half an inch deep in the wooden planks. "The jail's too good for this son of a gun. This damn son of a gun." The entirety of Marjorie's saloon leaned away from Sheriff Donaghy, including William. Even he had never heard cursing like that. On the other hand, Lou came up behind the sheriff and rested his hand on the man's shoulder. "But the shotgun, Sheriff," he whispered. "We all know what that shotgun looks like. We all know whoever has it now must have done the killing, right?" "Yeah." The sheriff turned to Lou with a microscopic but venomous smirk. "Sonny sure was proud of that thing. Never let it out sight. Well, it weren't there, were it?" "I like it," Lou said, grinning back. "Find the shotgun, find the man. Kill the man. And we'll use his shotgun to do it. In retribution." The sheriff patted Lou on the shoulder before hitching up his nice blue jeans and beginning an announcement to the town. "Now, listen here," he said, stepping to the front of the bar. "This here town's on lockdown. Ain't nobody allowed out till we settle this here murder case. It don't matter what you have going on. If we catch you trying to leave town, far as I'm concerned, that's a guilty verdict. With the power invested in me as sheriff, I'm willing to carry out that verdict. You hear?" The end responded with a hearty "aye" and an emotional slamming of mugs against their tables. The sheriff tipped his hat and motioned for Johnny Boy to accompany them as they headed for the door. "Now hold on for 1 second," a white-collared shirt and glasses man stood up from the back corner. "Must I point out the significant health risks of this implementation?" "Dr. Carter," the sheriff cleared his throat, "always happy to hear you share your endless thought. What if I have to go into a city to retrieve a medicine for an ailing patient? What if we get word of a pregnant woman living without a wet nurse, or a man failing his kidneys, and no doctor is available except for me? An emergency situation in which I am needed and can't leave the town. Do you want that on your conscience?" "When's that happened, Doc? You ever been called out of town to meet an emergency?" "Well, I suppose it very well could." "Doctor, I appreciate your dedication to the Hippocratic Oath, but I took an oath as well. Y'all have a pleasant evening." The sheriff left, and Johnny Boy, Lou, and the tall one went with him, which could only mean they were registered deputies, or honoraries at the very least. In a town this small, the rules were made up as they went along, that much was certain. William was frozen in his chair. He finished his drink but was too nervous to order another. Instead he sat, pretending to drink, as suspicious as that looked, and tried not to make his glancing out the window obvious. He couldn't take his eyes off his horse and the bounty she carried side or saddle. That damn shotgun, William thought. Why'd it have to be me? I didn't kill him. In fact, I'd wager I know who did. The hours rolled on, and neither the sheriff nor either of the deputies nor Johnny Boy returned.
Outside it was so quiet as to make a man nervous. Without being sure of it, he managed to talk himself into his plan, then waited till everyone else left and was addressed by the innkeeper. "You still nursing that whiskey, Skinny?" Marjorie said. "Just finished it," William replied, tipping over the cup. "Reckon I'm a slow drinker." "Humph, I'd just as well call you frugal." "Reckon you'd just as well call me all kinds of things." "Boy, taking your time on the drink can save you money, but it doesn't help me a lick. It's closing time around here. You can sleep in your room or at the table as you like, but all the drink is locked up. This here's last call." "I'm fine." "Suit yourself, and God bless you." She wrapped herself in a scarf from under the bar and left up the staircase, pulling her legs with her arms on each step. William remained, listening acutely outside for the sheriff or any other threat, his foot tapping rapidly against the floorboards. Finally he sprung up and forced his legs to walk out. He pet Winnie on the nose, perhaps to soothe her, and perhaps to soothe himself, unbuckled the satchel from her and slid it under his arm as inconspicuously as possible. He walked fast, but not too fast, straight to that empty well he saw before. The bag and the shotgun in it would go straight down that well, never to be found or seen again. Then, by this time tomorrow, the same could be said for him, at least by the people in Crows, Arizona. He held the bag out in front of him and came almost 5 feet to that big, beautiful hole in the ground, before a voice hollered out. "Stop," he said, "and put your hands up." William did as he was told, but not before sliding the satchel bag upon his shoulder. "What seems to be the problem?" The sheriff was not alone. Beside him was Lou. Lou looked delighted. The sheriff seemed mighty pissed. "You're not about to drop that down our well, are you, stranger?" "This bag?" William patted it casually. "Why in the world would I do that? To get myself in a heap of trouble?" "Or to get yourself out of it." "How do you figure?" "Quit playing dumb, boy," Lou called out, his fingers pinching at the ivory grip on his belt. "You know just as well as we." "Can't say that I do, considering what's in this here satchel." He patted it again. "And let me guess," Lou went on, "it's Sonny Cambell's shotgun, ain't it? Bet you regret taking that now, you sick murdering dog." Sonny Cambell? Shotgun? "Deputies, I've just arrived in this here town, and I don't got the fuzziest as to what you're on about. I can promise you, what's in this here bag, it ain't nothing you won't." "Then tell us," the sheriff said, edging closer and closer to William and the well, "or I'm fixin' to shoot." "This here is Marjorie's garment." "Who?" the sheriff said. "I said it's... Oh, excuse me. This here is Marjorie's garments. Her, undergarments." "Marjorie's got you doing laundry." "What for?" Lou asked, already sounding confused. "Well, she tell me with all this work on her plate, tending the bar and the inn, she ain't got much time to do her washing. Plus, these being her undergarments and all, she figured it better for a stranger to go through them than a neighbor. In fact, she confided in me this. She finds it embarrassing to get any kind of repairs done on her corsets, so she paid me 2 nickels and a dime if I took care of it for her. And while I was at it, I'd wash 'em too. I seen this here well and thought, fine place to pull some water for the cleaning." "This well ain't been wet for a dog's age," Lou shouted. "Except for this here rain wetting its rocks." You're right. I suppose I could show you if you..." William unzipped the top of his satchel and reached his hand in, when the sheriff shouted in protest. "No, you stop right there." "Sheriff?" Lou cocked his head.
Now, Marjorie's a real fine lady, and I've known her for many years now. Last thing I want is to soil and dishonor her by eyeing those private garments. You zip that up right now. Sheriff, you don't think... No, Lou, he shouted back. I don't. The town's on lockdown anyhow. We'll smoke 'em out, sure, no matter. And you, pointing towards William, there's water aplenty in the inn, and soap. You got no account drawn from our well neither. Get back to your room. We'll be searching your things in the morning, all with everyone else. I want you to know you'll be first, stranger. The sheriff tipped his hat and turned to be on his way.
Went through all his clothes, Lou said. But you didn't find anything, did you? Nothing but death. He spat at the ground before following the man in charge.
William nodded and brushed the dirt off his shirt, and once they'd walked off, he brushed the sweat off his brow, too. Clam! William tossed the gun across the room onto his bedside table after blocking his door with the chair, nearly knocking over the gas lamp. He came to the gun, cursing and pacing back and forth. Could a simple toss out of the window solve this mess? Maybe he could hide it somewhere in the inn. With a hammer and some tools, one could apart the gun and spread the pieces to the winds. He encountered these ideas with immediate drawback, either too loud, apparent, or stupid. The sheriff was on high alert now. One wrong step and it's over. He picked up that beautiful shotgun and shook it out of frustration, but he felt a rattle inside he hadn't noticed before. He cocked open the loading chamber and found a short, thin sheet of parchment, and with his pinky and ring finger, he could reach in and extract. It was a letter written in exquisite Western calligraphy, albeit brief. To Violet, with love. Violet, he said aloud, holding the letter like a Chinese fortune before rolling it up and sticking it behind his ear. William's pocket watch read midnight, sending a chill down the man's spine. It was a deathly time, but he pondered if he'd ever make it to another midnight again. He'd either be riding his horse into the sunrise or the grave soon. Part 3. 2 days prior, in the perspective of Two Guns, Arizona, a woman watched the first light of day from atop her horse, perfectly drunk enough to still ride. The town was still asleep, and perhaps if a soul were around to catch sight, they might have stopped her, being that she was obscenely pregnant and emotional. She'd hitched her hair in a bonnet and tied 2 tablecloths around her waist to support her swelling stomach, and left for Crows in the quiet August dawn. She rode away from town on Scorpion's Trail, slowly at first, but once the woman had her bearings, she kicked the horse to move faster. And then, after an hour, she was confident she could weather a gallop. It hurt her stomach, and even with the tablecloths tied around her belly, she kept one hand on her stomach and the other on the reins for the entire journey. It took her 2 days to make the journey, which took William and Donaghy 3. Not due to the canteen of coffee she carried with her, the strong tobacco she smoked, the half bottle of liquor she drank in panic before leaving town, or even that her horse Lucky was faster than most. It was solely because she felt something was wrong and no time could be spared. She didn't eat to rest. She stopped to urinate and vomit, and that was all. Early in the second night, when she began to feel drowsy, she was jolted back into eager alertness when the sound of growling came from her flank. She pulled on the reins, and there beside her were 2 coyotes, growling and yipping and reaching for her horse's heels. Lucky bucked back and then again, but missed the spry coyotes. Through all the commotion, the woman could pull a Dillinger pocket pistol from her holster and fire a ball into a coyote's eye, killing it and scaring the other away. The coyotes were lured by the smell of a human corpse, which they fed on 10 yards off the trail.
The woman didn't see the corpse in the dark of night, but if she realized who it was, she'd have kept riding on anyway. Just past midnight, the woman pulled into town and thanked God for being so merciful, as even an hour more of riding might have killed her. She tied Lucky to a post next to another horse, barely able to keep herself up, and stumbled into the nearest inn, using all her power to keep from falling down. "Help! Please help!" she moaned as she sat in the inn, catching her breath and feeling her head for warmth. A minute passed and no one came, so again she called out, "Help! Someone help!" William, in his room and still considering the shotgun, heard the woman's voice. He sprang to the door and went to look, his curiosity piqued. But in his sound senses, he halted and waited for the innkeeper to look. He heard the door a few rooms down open and shut, followed by the thudding of Marjorie making her way down the hall, cursing the way a woman does only when she thinks no one is listening. She passed by his door and then proceeded down the stairs back into the drinking room. He opened his door quietly and walked softly behind, sticking only his ear out beyond the corner of the staircase. Yeah, how can I be of service? Oh, my word, are you all right?" There was a tender concern in Marjorie's voice that William did not think possible before. "I'm very thirsty," the woman replied in between deep breaths. "No beer. Water. Only water." "Of course." Marjorie clomped behind the bar and quickly returned with something to drink, which the woman gulped loudly and had no strength to hold the mug afterward, letting it come crashing to the ground. "More," she said. "I'll get you something to eat. Let's get you to a room free of charge. Don't be frightened, but I'm sending the doctor immediately." "Thank you." "Excuse me. Before anyone else is involved, may I interject?" William said, revealing himself as he sauntered down the staircase. "What in the hell are you doing here, drink nurse? I told you the bar is closed," Marjorie barked, to which William merely lifted an index finger and passed her by. He stood above the woman in her seat, who looked up at William with an anger that soon vanished as he pulled the note from behind his ear like a rolled cigarette and spread it out in her hand. Where did you get this?" she said. "You wouldn't happen to be Miss Violet?" Yes, I'm Violet Cambell. Who are you?" "Violet?" Marjorie said, then brushed aside the tattered locks which hid the woman's eyes. "My goodness, it is you! I didn't even recognize." "Hello, Marjorie. Sorry I haven't been writing you much." "My name is William Philidorus," he went on, "and you may or may not already be aware, but I'm afraid poor love Sonny is dead." The look on Violet's face was that of some surprise, but not utter shock, and then resignation and sadness. "I wasn't sure, but I knew something was wrong. He hadn't come home when he was supposed to. He always comes home when he's supposed to." "Violet, I know you're in grief, but I want to say it means the world to me that you came. I think God might have sent you here to save me." William bent down on one knee and looked her in the eyes with a pleading expression that begged for sympathy. "Because I know who it is that killed your husband. I just don't know how to prove it." "But how?" "By the chariot's fire," a voice shouted from the stoop, and the bat wings of the inn swung open once more as Donaghy stood in the doorway, alone this time. He placed his hands on his hips and examined the scene with his head bent. "I'll be. I just knew it was you. I'd recognize that lovable Lucky anywhere. You rode him in all by your lonesome there, Violet." "Hello, Sheriff Donaghy. That's right, I rode in, but I wasn't by my lonesome now, was I?" She rubbed her bulging stomach. "I'm very, very tired. Yet, now that I've heard the big news, I'm worried I cannot sleep." "Well, I for one will rest easier now, knowing you're safe.
Why don't you come with me back to the sheriff's station for the night? I'll put you up in our new hammock."
No, that's all right, Sheriff," Violet said, hoisting herself back to her feet. "I'd rather prefer the comfort of a very dear old friend."
"You mean Marjorie?" the sheriff asked.
"No, Mr. William Philidorus here, a very dear and old friend indeed." She looked over to William and nodded, signaling him to play along.
"This man here's an old friend?" the sheriff asked doubtfully. "Well then, why didn't you say you knew the Cambells?"
"Well, that's because I don't know the Cambells. I only know Violet from our old school days. Haven't kept in touch too well, so this here is just serendipity. Though I wish the lovely Violet and I were meeting on better circumstances." "So you see, Sheriff," Violet cut in, "because I'm so rattled as well, I'd much find comfort in visiting with an old friend. I don't believe either of us is ready for sleep, and talking through the night, catching up, and reminiscing might do us both good." The sheriff glanced from Violet to William, to Violet, to William, and then cleared his throat.
"Well, an unmarried man and woman together in the room alone, through the night, it's...
"But considering the circumstances," Violet cut in, sounding more and more pitiful. The sheriff let out a flustered huff and gestured for them to get. Without looking up from the floorboards, he left the saloon quickly, the bat wings flapping behind him. "Thank you, Sheriff. I'll be seeing you in the morning," Violet called after him. She leaned on William's arm as they slowly returned up the staircase. Meanwhile, Marjorie stepped outside and caught the sheriff on her porch smoking his pipe. She whispered,
"Sheriff, you can't believe that story, can you?" "Not entirely," he whispered back. "But a good deputy must know when to shoot at a bird and when to let them lead you to the nest."
Part 4. Violet came into the room first, followed by William, and then promptly shut the door behind him and jammed it up with the chair as if she'd been in this room 100 times before, and then right away pulled a switchblade from her leg garment. "All right, William, if that's your real name, you'd better tell me the truth. Where did you get that letter? Off my husband's corpse?"
"Well, I did, but..."
"Aha!"
"Lady, I'm not trying to trick you, and I didn't kill your husband. I found him. I always find things. I'm a scavenger by God's design, and on my way out west to make my fortune in the Gold Hills. I stayed in Two Guns for a time, biggest city I've been to in years, and took the Scorpion Trail down to this here settlement. Along the way, I found your husband. He was fleeced just as good as I would do it. Well, almost anyway. Let me show you." He bent down by the bed, which startled Violet, who came in closer and stuck the knife next to William's neck stubble. He raised his hands in the air and eyed her thoughtfully. "All right, then. How about you have a look, then?" She tapped her foot, flashed her eyes toward the bed and back, and said, "Fine, I will." William slowly backed away and came in and took his place. She bent down, couldn't make it from her engorged pregnant belly, and let out a bellowing groan. She leaned back up and, setting the knife down, unfastened the bed sheets from around her stomach, let out an exhausted sigh, and tried again. This time, just managed to lean far enough to reach under. "How long?" "What's that?" she said, sticking her hand around the wooden bed frame. "How long have you been, with child?" 8 months, Violet said solemnly. 8 months? Goodness, you're just about ready to pop, ain't you? "I suppose." She spoke without joy, but William was a lover of children and didn't pick up on her morosity. "What do you name it?" "I read in the paper that William is a very fashionable name these days. My mother was way ahead of her time. She was also quite the chef, if that helps." "I'm not naming my baby after you, freak," Violet snapped at the man. "It's a girl anyway. I wouldn't name a girl William. or any other baby for that matter.
She reached down further, supporting herself on one palm, and stretched out as far as she could until the tip of her middle finger touched something. She scratched at it with her fingernails, bringing it closer, and pawed away until she could hold it in a grip and brought it out. When the shotgun was finally in her hands, she became speechless.
"Recognize it?" William asked.
"Of course," Violet said, her voice solemn. "It's the Colonel. That's its name."
"It's 1 in a million," William said. "A king among its kind. And that metal engraving? Excellent work."
"Thank you," she said. "I did it myself last week."
"You did that?" William's eyes widened. "Last week?"
"It was a present. The engraving, I mean. He, Sonny, never left home without the Colonel. Once I realized something was wrong, I thought I'd never see it again, but God, it's so strange to see it without Sonny. It's just wrong."
Violet held the shotgun in her hands, staring into it as her lips quivered and eyes watered, until she dropped it to the ground and clutched at her face. William came by her side and put a hand around her shoulder, to which she responded by falling into his chest and letting out 3 bursts of sobbing wails, muffled by his body, before pulling herself back up and steadying her emotions.
"No, there's no time for that," she said, sniffling her nose and wiping away the tears. "I've got no time hardly at all. It's not what Sonny would want anyway."
"What would he want?"
"He'd want for me to get the bastards."
"He and I both, ma'am," William nodded. "Did your man have very many enemies?"
"No, none. He lived in towns like Crow's where enemies were hard to come by. The people weren't that type, and neither was he."
"Well, did he have coveters? Were people envious of your husband?"
"No, no. Covetous of what? We aren't wealthy, at least no more than any other. Well, that was until—"
"Until what?"
"Until my husband spent a year in California himself."
Violet's eyes carried an intensity that spoke to William about the secret she was unveiling.
"He spent a year in California and made some gold."
"Some?" William's eyebrow raised, and despite the solemn air of Violet's story, he still couldn't resist the urge to ask, "How much is some?"
"All I can say is he's one of the lucky ones. I suppose that didn't last long."
"Had you spent the gold?"
She laughed. "Only a pittance. But before we bought the farm, Sonny wanted to head to his favorite place on earth, Crow's, and spread some of the wealth. Give back to the community he loved so much. We had plenty to go around after all. Meanwhile, I'd stay in Two Guns and look after myself and the baby."
"Did your husband make it known he was coming into town?"
"He wrote a letter to the sheriff, that's all."
"And no one else could have read that letter? No one? At all?"
"Anything's possible."
"Let me tell you, it's those bastards who stand by the sheriff. They killed your husband to get the gold they knew he had. Those two, Lou and whatever. Then they left the shotgun, knowing someone coming by would pick it up and get themselves framed. All the same, I get the feeling they're still not done."
"Yeah?"
"Yeah. Otherwise they'd be dust in the wind, hightailing it back east or maybe Mexico, and never show their hides around these parts again. 'Cept they didn't find your gold, and neither did I."
"That's because he hid it too well. I know for a fact they didn't find it."
"Really? So where is it? Still on his body?"
Rather than answer that question, Violet frowned, clutched at her ribs, and then ran her hand softly along her stomach. "Lou will kill me too, once he has what he needs. He could just kill me too."
"Maybe," William said seriously. "Maybe not.
As far as I'm concerned, I know he'll kill me the first chance he gets." "Then all you can do now," Violet stroked the end of the Colonel's barrel, thumbed the front sight, and smiled for the first time since riding in, "is give him that chance." Part 5. As 2:00 approached, the 3 deputy men found different ways to stay awake as they waited for morning in the hoosegow. The sheriff drank, smoked, and rocked on his chair by the open door. He heard the sounds of crickets and the droplets falling sparsely in the calm after rain. Lou played solitaire and drank too. The tall man, George Michelin for the record, counted coins, organizing them by date of mint and separating them into towers accordingly. He drank, but less. The sheriff rubbed the bridge of his nose up and down, pinched his eyes, and blinked hard. He wasn't sure he could physically force himself to stay awake much longer, and may as well tell the boys to man the fort for him while he lays down in the back. Before he could do so, a woman manifested on his doorstep. "Violet." The sheriff put down his whiskey bottle and stood straight, his drunkenness reading nowhere on his body. "Sheriff, there's something I must tell you right away. It's about that man, William. The truth is, he really isn't a friend of mine or Sonny's, and I think he may have had something to do with the murder of my husband." "You don't say," he replied and smirked as if he'd known it all along. "Well, why don't you come in and explain a little bit more?" "I'm afraid I'm not sure that's a good idea. See, I'm rather emotional, and I really don't want to cry in front of more men than I have to." Violet pressed a hanky against her face and sucked in the air sharply. "Oh, I'm sorry." The sheriff sighed, rolled his neck, and turned to Lou and George. He gave his men the signal to stand outside. Neither man looked pleased, but as they came out stretching their backs and arms and making yawning sounds, they thought a little fresh air wouldn't be so bad. They tipped their hats to Violet, who thanked them for understanding as she closed the door behind them. Then she locked it. "What do you think she's gonna tell him?" George whispered. "How the hell should I know? It don't really matter anyway. We have nothing to worry about. That tall visitor of ours sounds like he should be the worried one, matter of fact." Something landed in the dirt beside them, bringing a small plume of brown dust into the air. Then another, as if the sky were hailing on one single spot. The 2 men threw their heads around till catching sight of another man hiding just around the corner of the sheriff's office and shading himself in the darkness of its shadows. "Please, help," William whispered. "I beg of you, take pity on me." "And why the hell should we do that?" Lou called back, louder than William. "And why shouldn't we go back right now and tell the sheriff you're out past curfew?" "Because I can make you rich." Lou and George gave each other a look and then made their way into the shadows. "How are you planning on doing that?" Lou spoke with a whisper now, too. "What? You find something shiny on old Sonny?" "Yeah, you find something shiny?" George added. "Look, I didn't kill that man. I don't know who did, and I don't care. All I want is my life, and I can make that worth your while." "Is that what this is about? Proving your innocence?" Lou asked. "Hell no. Ain't no point in that. I just want to get out of here. See, that woman rode in, acting inconsolable. I lied and said I knew her husband. She must have believed me and accepted me as a friend in all that madness she was feeling. We went to my room and she broke down, crying, caterwauling to high heaven. She wanted to know if I'd ever seen a shotgun of his, and I said I had. I described it to her, and she knew it was the one. That's when she said if anything could calm her down, it would be to see that shotgun one more time. I knew it was stupid, but I felt so bad for the woman. I showed it to her. I showed her the shotgun.
So, you do have the shotgun? Lou asked and patted George's back as they exchanged excited glances. Yes, but I didn't kill the man. You've got to believe me. Sure, we believe you. So what happened when you showed her the gun? What do you think? She said I killed him. Then she run off, and I followed her from behind and watched her enter the sheriff's office. That's when I hid behind this wall and called you boys over. Well, I hate to say it, my friend, but my hands are tied. If you got the shotgun, then, Let me make you a deal, William interrupted. What if I told you that shotgun wasn't all I found? What if I told you whoever killed Sonny and took all his things missed a big, fat something? Not just a little, a lot. Yeah? Lou licked his lips. Well, let me see it. Let me see the gold. William signaled with his finger for them to wait, then turned around and moved a few loose planks piled up on the ground. He reached into the pile and pulled something out, hiding it at first, then somewhat apprehensively revealing it to Lou and George. It was the Cambell family shotgun. So? Lou asked. So, William reached into his back pocket slowly, to not raise alarm, and pulled from it a handkerchief. Then he pulled from his other pocket a flask, opened it with his teeth, and poured some of the harsh, reeking liquor into the cloth. He rubbed it on its beautiful metal engravings as if he were cleaning them, and then held the shotgun out into the silver moonlight. The metal engravings glimmered in a yellow tint that was unmistakable. Oh, my Lord, Lou said in a hushed cough of amazement. The engravings, they were made of gold. It's all one big slab of gold. The woman did it. She's an incredible artist and an even better deluder. It was coated in aluminum paint made with metal powder so no one could tell what it was made of. What do you think of that? Pretty smart. Lou and George said nothing but stared into the gold with growing amazement. William stepped forward, beckoning them to take it. Please, just take it and show your sheriff. Use the gold to better this town. You'll finally have a real bank. Just let me go. Of course, Lou said, finally getting a grip. Thank you, William. And the town of Crows thanks you too. Lou snatched the shotgun away with a fanatical eagerness, then clutched it close with giddiness as George came in and began to stroke the gold parts with his thumb before Lou clutched it even closer, like a dog guarding their bone. Thank you, and may God smile upon you always, William said, shuffling away into the darkness. Yeah, get out of here before we change our mind. Of course, thank you. William's voice became less and less until vanishing. Lou and George waited until they were sure he was gone, and then exchanged glances to be sure the other was on the same page. They snuck around to the front of the sheriff's office, seeing that the door was still closed, which meant the sheriff was still talking to Violet, which meant he wouldn't see them ride off on their horses. Come on! Lou hurried tall George along as he struggled to mount his horse and reached his hands into his friend's undercarriage to help scoop him up. Lou didn't have that problem. He practically flew onto his horse's saddle. He whipped the reins with urgency, spinning the horse around to the north side of the street and galloping away. George was just a little slower, turning his horse the same way, and then riding after, but he kept his head turned behind him to watch the sheriff's office. What are you looking back for? Lou called out. Let's go! Tall George saw no man, woman, or horses coming after them, but still, what he did see chilled him to the core. The front door of the sheriff's office remained shut, but the back door, he could see now, was wide open. Lou, he called out. Lou, I don't think... Bam! A shot was fired, and a slug caught George in the neck, knocking him off his horse into the dirt. His critter bucked wildly and then rode off in the opposite way. Lou turned his head and caught sight of the death, which, even in his desire to leave town right away, drew on his instincts to pull his reins and slow his horse. He wasn't thinking. "Don't you move a muscle," the sheriff spoke, coming out from his hiding spot and ducking behind the well, "or I'll do you just like George." "You killed him," Lou yelled. "Actually," the sheriff crept out in front of the well, "I was just watching."
He nodded towards the other side of the street, and there, creeping on the bank awning, was Marjorie, gripping a six-shooter and winking at Lou. Just next to her was Violet, not winking and not smiling. A moment later, Lou heard the sound of a different horse, not George's, galloping at full speed and descending into silence. He was headed west, and soon he would be there, just like Sonny was. "I'm afraid she told us everything, Lou," the sheriff went on, still edging closer to Lou. "I didn't necessarily believe her, but she guaranteed me that you would be out of this town in just a few minutes like a cannonball. She was right. Like we said, any man leaving town tonight, that's a guilty verdict." "Fine." Lou sucked in his lip and shut his eyes. "Then do it. Do it!" "This was a nice town, Lou. Ain't nothing goes wrong in Crows. Then you, a lawman, decided to ruin all that. Remember when I said jail's too good for you? Well, I changed my mind." Violet watched as the sheriff took the colonel out of Lou's hands, then pointed it at him as he got off the horse and escorted him back to the sheriff's office, this time as a prisoner and not an employee. Violet nodded to the sheriff before he entered the office, and he returned it with the tip of his hat. "What a night," Marjorie said. "Oh, you could say that again," Violet gasped, stumbled backward, and caught her arm on the wall behind her. "Oh," she exclaimed in guttural shock. "Oh, my goodness!" Marjorie wrapped an arm around her friend to keep her steady. "It's coming," Violet spoke in between gasps. The baby!" Marjorie whistled with her fingers and drew the sheriff back out of his office, seeing that Lou was properly jailed. They lifted her up and laid her down on a bed as Marjorie patted the sweat from her head and spoke to her in comforting tones. A moment later, the sheriff reemerged with Dr. Carter. "All right, Miss Violet, everything will be just fine." "Be just fine," Violet repeated. "You just keep breathing deep breaths and focus on the sound of my voice. Sound your voice." They spent the next 6 hours delivering the baby, and when it was confirmed a living birth, she was laid in her mother's arms. It was a girl, just as she and Sonny had hoped. "What do you name it?" Marjorie asked. "Sonny picked out a name already, from a Spanish dictionary he was learning out of." She looked down into the baby's face and couldn't help but laugh and cry, all at the same time. "Vida," she said.
Thank you for listening to In the Now Eventually. If you enjoyed this, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe.